Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deborah Hutton, and it's indeed a great pleasure to welcome you here to Wynnsday 2012 from the home of Wynns in Coonawarra, South Australia. And as most of you know, Wynnsday is a fairly significant day. It's the first Wednesday in August, and it's become a bit of a tradition marking the new season vintage releases. And today is also very special because for the first time our Masterclass is being streamed live to the Wynnsday online hub to a whole bunch of enthusiasts, wine enthusiasts and wine collectors from not only around Australia, from around the world. So a very big warm welcome to all our online friends. We're all very excited to be here. Of course, there's been much anticipation around this year's release, particularly the 55th vintage of the Wynns Coonawarra Estate Black Label Cabernet Sauvignon, and the inaugural release, of course there'll be much chat about that, of the Wynns Black Label Shiraz. Very excited to be here, of course, and we're thrilled to have quite a few familiar faces up here with me, joining me to discuss the releases this afternoon. So please help me welcome, first and foremost, celebrating her 20th vintage, which is quite remarkable, one of Australia's most respected winemakers. Would you please welcome Wynns senior winemaker Sue Hodder? Put your hands together, come on boys. Sue, 20 vintages is quite an achievement. Maybe you could just tell us what's the biggest sort of challenge, or probably the biggest change that you've seen in that time, in that period?
Oh, we've seen so much happen in the last 20 years. Everything from diverse vintages to rejuvenating our old vineyards. We've rebuilt the modern new winery. We've learnt a lot, but there's still a lot more to go. And personally, I've been honoured to be part of it all.
I have to tell you, your cellar door is looking sensational. I think it's a year today that it was finished. It looks brilliant. So, okay, having a profound understanding of the cultural history of the Coonawarra and what makes this such a landmark wine region, Wynns viticulturist Alan Jenkins. Alan, it's great to see you here again. In a nutshell, if it's possible, perhaps you could tell us why this is such an extraordinary region, obviously continuing to produce premium Cabernet and Shiraz.
Coonawarra is an exceptional region. We've got these heritage vineyards that are planted in this amazing and rare and precious Terra Rossa soil, and we're blessed with a long, cool ripening season that gives us wonderful flavours and complexity in our fruit that then translates into the wine. We also have beautiful underground water that's great quality, and it helps us a lot in our management throughout the season. So you put all of this together with a talented team and you really have something that's quite extraordinary.
Absolutely. And one of Australia's leading authorities on Australian wine, he's written something like 65 books, just released the 2013 Australian Wine Companion. We have all visited his website at some stage. He's now getting even more high-tech. He's just released his new app. And a little bit of a plug here, his autobiography has just been released called A Life in Wine. Would you please welcome James Halliday? James, you've done a few of these. Just tell us what you're looking forward to most today.
Well, I think the interplay between vintage on the one hand and then the single vineyard representation of these vintages. I think the single vineyard thing is the underlying undercurrent here, because even at the top end, you actually in fact have some very specific, when I say top end, Michael Riddoch, etc., you indeed actually have some very specific fruit selection for those wines.
It'll be good for hearing what you have to say today. And of course, your sparring partner, which is always very interesting to listen to you two, one of the country's most influential wine writers, critics and educators, Jeremy Oliver, fully independent Australian wine commentator who has a huge presence throughout the Asian region, as we know, authored 23 books, including the Australian Wine Annual, and the first book written by a Westerner in Chinese for the Chinese market. And we had a bit of a laugh yesterday because I was saying, well, that's no mean feat. And Jeremy was, I think you were at a wine tasting and describing one of the notes as blackberry. And I think one of the Chinese guys says, how does my wine taste like my phone? There's always a challenge in itself.
It is a challenge, and you know, it's interesting when you take what we think is a Western wine description into different cultures, especially some of the Asian cultures, Deborah, we can fall into the trap, you know, not quite using their terminology. So we do need to. It was a big learning thing for me, I can guarantee it.
Very amusing, I have to say. So welcome, and thank you very much for joining us. Okay, well, this year's new releases reflect 4 very different Coonawarra vintages, obviously with the quality and the house style of Wynns. 2009 is where we start, the 2009 John Riddoch Cabernet Sauvignon, Michael Shiraz and the single vineyard Glengyle Cabernet Sauvignon. Also we'll be seeing, obviously reflecting more the traditional Coonawarra vintage. 2010, the very silky and medium-bodied Wynns 2010 V&A Lane. Today also marks, as I said, the release of the 55th vintage of the Wynns Black Label Cabernet Sauvignon and its partner. As I said, there will be a bit of discussion about the inaugural release of the Wynns Black Label Shiraz. And as a result of the cooler year of 2011, a very spicy 2011 Wynns Shiraz. And also, this year's vintage release also includes the 2012 Chardonnay and the 50th vintage Riesling, which we don't have today, but they will be available in the coming months. So in today's masterclass, we'll be tasting 8 wines. We have 4 from the first bracket, which is the full vintage Shiraz, the new vintage Shiraz, and the 4 Cabernet Sauvignon new releases in the second bracket. Now, you will note also that you've got a tasting booklet there if you want to make some notes with you as we go along the way. Well, we all know that Coonawarra is iconic for its reds. So obviously, the flagship for the reason is the Cabernet Sauvignon. However, Wynns has gained a pretty good reputation as a producer of quality Coonawarra Shiraz. Been producing Shiraz since back in the 1950s, when it was known then as Hermitage, and of course a lot of you would know that, especially you, James. I think it's fair to say that the winemaking skills with Shiraz are very much in parallel with the Cabernet. Be a good question to ask, I think, to you, James. Is it actually easy to define the Coonawarra Shiraz flavour?
If you incorporate flavour and texture, I think you've got that pigeon pair twins. You can't really meaningfully talk about one without the other. So talking about texture first up, silky, medium-bodied, quite fragrant always, particularly when they're young. They then change a bit as they age. The flavours run through red and black fruit, and I've made a sneaky little start on the 2011 and found a bit more red fruit, even perhaps cherry, that you don't often see in the wine when it's young.
Any comments on Sue?
Yes, I'll endorse those comments. Medium-bodied with that mid-palate silkiness, I think.
Okay. Well, let's go to our first wine, which is the Wynns Coonawarra Estate Shiraz 2011. As we discussed, it's a cool climate style, very refreshing, medium-bodied wine. It will age gracefully, obviously, but has enough upfront character to be enjoyed from release. Sue, I think it's fair to say that 2011 was pretty tough conditions for most winemakers. How do you think that played out with this particular vintage?
Yes, 2011 was certainly challenging vintage, and we were very judicious in the fruit that we did pick. We just had a very clear idea that whatever grapes we picked, we had to make good wine out of. And so with that in mind, we did leave quite a lot behind. However, the wines we have made in small quantities, we're very pleased with.
Jeremy, do you think, being that the comments around the 2011, do you think it affects the ageing potential of this wine?
Yes, I think it will. I don't see this as being a super long-term wine, but I think it's been a great achievement. And I've just been scribbling some words on this wine. I love the fact that it's got the sweet red fruits that James was talking about. To me, it's got some attractive dried herbal, spicy licorice aromas. It's got a really lovely, elegant texture. and it's got a real crunchy extract of tannin. So I think it's quite a complete wine. It's nothing to be shy of, but I don't see it as being perhaps, the longest living of the Wynns Shiraz. But hey, it's a terrific wine out of 2011, all right.
Yeah, exactly. So I just noticed there's also, in terms of oak, you've got a mixture of American and French. How do you decide on how you put that together?
Yes, generally we use French oak, but traditionally we have used a small amount of American oak, small quantity, just to add some texture and mid-palate to the wine.
Okay. Well, I think we all would like to move on now to one of the biggest stories today is really the inaugural release of the Wynns Coonawarra Estate Black Label Shiraz 2010.
Coonawarra has a magnificent heritage with Cabernet, but in fact the oldest vines were Shiraz. And in 1955, Wynns crafted the first Michael Hermitage, a wine that became an Australian icon. In the years since, as their reputation for exceptional Cabernet grew, Wynns winemaking and viticultural skills with Shiraz developed in parallel. With prime vineyards on the Terra Rossa soil and extensive plantings throughout the 90s. Now, Wynns classic Cabernet has finally met its match. Finely structured with balance and finesse, and every bit the equal of its much revered peer, Wynns Coonawarra Black Label Shiraz.
Well, I think the first thing you'll note, breaking with tradition, is the new shaped bottle, the new sort of burgundy-shaped bottle, which makes it stand out. I walked into the cellar door earlier this morning, and it was the first thing I noticed. So that's the first thing. But Sue, I'd have to ask you, first and foremost, the question would have to be why? Why are you releasing the Black Label Shiraz?
Yes, well, it was obviously a very big decision to make to put a Shiraz alongside our most important wine, which is our Wynns Black Label Cabernet. And it's one that we didn't take lightly, but we do have a lot of vineyard that is very strong, and Alan's input in particular has really whipped them into shape, so to speak. And the last decade has been warmer, and this has augured very well for Coonawarra Shiraz, and the fact that the early history of the region was all about Shiraz, or Hermitage as we called it. So we believe that those reasons alone and the quality of the grapes mean that it was a good opportunity for us.
And Alan, you've been meticulously working these vines for the last 15 years or so. How do you think this wine really showcases all your hard work, you and your team?
We're really very excited to see this release of this wine. Coonawarra has a very, very strong heritage in terms of our Shiraz. Our oldest Shiraz block is actually a 1894 planted Shiraz, and there's a good reason why these Shiraz vines have lasted 120 years. They're quite a vigorous, strong variety, and we've had to use an array of techniques to really bring the Shiraz quality up and over a period of time. And so we're doing some quite exciting things with our Shiraz now.
Can I ask you one or two of those techniques?
We are using a lot of sacrificial canes where we're pulling down, say, 4 canes on a vine and tying them down, and to use that extra vigour we'll still spur prune, detailed hand prune the cordon, and those sacrificial canes use up some of the energy that these more vigorous vines have during the growing season. Come veraison, when the vine is changing colour and it's starting to ripen the fruit, just before that time we come through, we cut those sacrificial canes, throw them into the middle of the vineyard, and we've used up some of that vine's energy, and the berries are smaller and they'll lead to much more intense flavour and colour. And then we go through and do a bunch thin, 1 bunch a shoot, and really finesse the crop load so that's all perfectly balanced. So it's, we're continually modifying things. We're also opening these vine canopies up on the eastern side to let much more sun in on the fruit, and that gives us a lot better tannin structure and colour. So it's lots of ongoing modification over time.
Can I ask one, excuse me, one question there, Alan? Obviously, this is going to vary from one vintage to the next, but roughly how many tonnes per acre would you expect if these multi-techniques work to perfection?
We know over time that we have to really get our yield vine balance right. If we load the vine up with too much crop by leaving too many buds at pruning time, the vine then takes a long time to ripen that fruit and it doesn't ripen well. If we don't put enough fruit on at pruning time, the vine grows really vigorously and we end up with very large berries and shaded fruit, poor coloured fruit. So we put a lot of effort into trying to get that yield balance absolutely right, and for a wine of this quality we're aiming for around the 4, 5, 6 tonnes to the hectare mark, which is gives us a very nice balanced yield. And that's the final yield after we've removed all the sacrificial canes. We may, in fact, load them up with more like 10 tonne to the hectare initially, but the final result is quite low.
So it's a work in progress. James, you have any thoughts on this? It's quite a big moment for the Black Label Shiraz. Your initial thoughts on the tasting?
A really, really seriously good wine. Here you have black fruits, much more than red. It's very complex, and I keep on coming back to my texture and body, so a strongly textured and structured wine. It's only, and the amazing thing about this wine with that volume of flavour is that it's only 13.5% alcohol. And if certain regions in Australia don't take notice of this, they should do so. Clearly it's not necessary that we have much higher alcohol to get flavour. Terrific wine. I hit it blind in a tasting some, I don't know, months ago, and my head snapped back. I thought, wow, what is this? And I think, Jeremy, you had the same experience.
Yeah, exactly. It's I didn't even know they were doing it. It turned up and wow. But you can see why. I mean, listening to Alan, you can see the results in the bottle. You've got that purity and a translucent fruit. It's really vivacious. The tannins are so fine. There's this lovely undercurrent of a structure, and it's, in terms of weight, it's more of a European style, but to taste, it's a very Australian wine, and I like that about it. It speaks so much about this place, and you can see why they've kicked off with this wine. I think it's a great start.
Excellent. Excellent, okay. All right. Well, we're going to move on now to the Wynns Coonawarra Estate V&A Lane Shiraz 2010. And obviously this wine honours the very distinctive fruit of those very prized vineyards with a signature density and richness. And I was chatting last night to Sarah Pigeon, who is the winemaker for this particular one. And so I have to ask you, it's you work quite closely with Sarah on this, but this is very much her baby, isn't it? What do the two of you, how do you both work together on it?
Oh, we've been working together for a long time, of course, and the main characteristic of our working relationship is honesty, and that can be very blunt, particularly in the middle of vintage. But
we have a fair amount of respect for each other.
Yes, no, as I said, we've been working together a long time. But she does a great job with these remarkable fine parcels of wine. She spends a lot of time in those vineyards.
Alan, what is it about the V&A Lane that makes it so distinctive? I mean, it's really the Golden Mile, but...
Golden Mile,
yeah.
Interesting description. The V&A Lane bisects Riddoch Highway about 5 kilometres south of here, so it's a little bit cooler, a little bit more overcast down there, even though it's only a short distance south of the winery. That probably adds some fineness to the character that you see in the wine. The vineyard itself was primarily planted in 1972. It's on the eastern side of the Riddoch Highway, and it has an array of soils from classic shallow terra rossa that really presents well in wetter seasons, and right through to, as you go toward the eastern part of the vineyard, into a sandier loam, a shallow sandy loam that presents some nice peppery characters, for example, in the Shiraz. So it's we have an array of vineyards there that we use different management techniques on, but we're very proud of that area, and it has some really lovely history associated with that V&A lane as well.
Just on probably a sort of broader international scale, as you're just sort of talking about the Shiraz, and Jeremy, how do you think this holds up, particularly in China, which you're doing some work for, and obviously everyone's very interested in going into the Asian market. How do you think this holds up, and what's their appeal? What's their palate?
Oh, the Chinese palate is such a varied thing because simply it's such a huge place. And but the thing that a lot of people don't expect is with an Asian culture is that the Chinese are used to drinking very strong tea, and they use the leaves of good tea quite a bit. So they're used to tannin, they're used to structure, and there's no need to be shy with it. This wine is a very silky, fine, and incredibly spicy wine. I think this would go well with a wide range of cuisines in China, especially to the north. I'm getting really exotic sort of masala Indian spice. I just see spice all the way through this beautiful wine. I think this is a wine that anyone who identifies with Shiraz from anywhere around the world would just would really enjoy drinking. It's so open and so easy, but I also see it as a wine. I mean, my first impression, I wrote some time back, I think this wine will certainly be looking good in another 15 to 20 years. It's got lovely balance, and the balance is what's going to see it through.
And so just generally with Shiraz, are we seeing sort of less alcohol content across the variety?
Well, Coonawarra Shiraz typically isn't high in alcohol. I mean, of course there are exceptions, but the better vineyards ripen early with moderate sugar and should therefore have moderate alcohol, and that contributes to the silky texture of the wine.
All right, well, let's move on now to the Wynns Coonawarra Estate Michael Shiraz 2009. And obviously this fruit has been, really have come from some of the best vineyard sites in the Coonawarra, and is really only made in the years where the grapes are of an exceptional high quality. I think the 2009 delivers that. How does this stand, Jeremy, I'll ask you, or James, how does it stand with the previous Michael release? I think the last one was in what? Was it 08?
1 year.
Yeah.
Well, difference in year, cool year, 09, was celebrated and much talked about, warm to, depends where you were, warm to hot, 08. This is a beautiful Michael. I often find them not confronting, but certainly get your full attention when they're young. Whereas that V&A lane, you could drink any time, and the 11 Shiraz, I reckon it's a drink now or sooner. Michael, you have to be patient with, and I think for me, both with Michael and Riddoch, they have a 10th birthday party when they start moving from exuberant, adolescent, hormone-crazed things, 10, I don't know how they could possibly be hormone-crazed, to wines that actually let you relax and enjoy them. This is a very good wine, but I think it does deserve respect and time in the cellar.
So you're saying sort of minimum of 10 years?
Well, I believe they do change quite. It's a bit like Italian Amarone that needs 13 years before it changes. And then it does it overnight, so I'm told.
Right. Sue, would you agree with that? You've always got a bit of a view on the cellaring potential.
Yes, but cellaring potential is a very personal thing. I like a bit of primary fresh fruit in my wines, but we know, of course, with this wine that the 55 Michael, the iconic Michael Hermitage, is still ageing well. So it's a bit of an open-ended question onto the cellaring potential of this wine.
Yeah. Jeremy, we've now been through the first bracket. Do you have any sort of way you'd like to describe, if you could, the four Shiraz?
Yeah, I just think you're seeing from one region a lot of different personalities, and I like the way that the Wynns structure, if you like, of labels and wines enables them to deal with the cool year, as you can see with the 2011. You've got then this just joyful black label, our first release, and that's a distinctively different wine to anything else on the table, which is the best part. If that wine was just like another baby Michael, you'd be less interesting. Be good, but less interesting, but it's got its own personality. The V&A lane we've discussed, that silkiness, spiciness, perfume, it's distinctively different again. And then you have the rather more shouldered, as James is sort of suggesting, perhaps testosterone-riddled Michael there, that is just cries out for time in the cellar. But if you really wanted to drink it now and gave it plenty of air, it would be a delight. But it would also, I think it's going to be a delight for 20, 30, 40 years. So I just think that as a group, they reflect where Australian Shiraz needs to go and do more of. And they do it really well.
Excellent. Very good. All right, we're going to move on now to our second bracket, which is, of course, the Cabernet Sauvignon releases, and they all carry the very distinctive Wynns Cabernet style. Just generally, Alan, we touched on it a minute ago, but really, what are some of the key things that you and your team are doing really to ensure the soil health, or really the quality of the wines continue? Because we are talking about, you guys have been here for a long time, so...
Yeah, these wines that we're tasting this morning really reflect quite a lot of years of intense focus, and for the last decade we've been rejuvenating a lot of our heritage vineyards by primarily cutting them off and retraining them and rejuvenating the root systems to produce fruit and grow fruit that is bright and well coloured and great flavour. So that's been a major focus for us during the last 10 years. We've probably rejuvenated the majority of our older heritage vineyards. We are now in the throes of replanting, and so we're now in the throes of replacing vineyards, and so we have quite a strong replanting program happening at the moment. We've been, during the winter, taking a lot of cuttings, selected cuttings from our heritage vineyards for propagation for the coming year, and we're looking to plant 45 hectares this year and 95 hectares next year. So we have a very serious replanting program happening looking forward into the future, and we're using an array of new clones, imported clones, Australian clones, as well as our own heritage selections from the estate. So we're pretty excited about that.
I'd say it's in good hands. Because actually, how many people have you got on your team that you actually work with?
We'd have the equivalent of about 100 people working on Wynns full time in the vineyards. So it's pretty significant.
That's significant.
Group of people.
Yeah. Well done you. That's some serious work. Okay, so let's move on now to the Wynns Coonawarra Estate V&A Cabernet Shiraz. It's a perfect way to move from Shiraz into the Cabernet bracket. I can almost taste the soil. Yeah, you can. It's very earthy, isn't it?
Also has a, sorry.
Go on, you go.
I just say it also has just a distinctive, and I've just looked at my notes I made some time back too. It's got a real cola character that I actually find quite distinctive, and a beautiful tannin structure. I'd describe the tannins in this one like a real al dente. That there's a real toothiness about them.
It's an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah, it's delicious.
James, do you think there's a bit of a resurgence for the traditional Cabernet Shiraz blend?
Yes, there are a couple of people who are trying to get Cabernet Shiraz well and truly back onto the menu. The reason why it, I think, is a really good blend, Cabernet traditionally, anyway, has a dip in the mid-palate. You used to call it the donut or the hole in the mid-palate. So it starts strong, finishes strong, obviously, with Cabernet tannins. Shiraz, the profile in the mouth is quite different. It reaches its maximum expression in the mid-palate. So you've got superimposed this thing that ends up looking a bit like a fish, but it's it's even throughout. So that's my sort of visual representation of what goes on with the blend of Cabernet and Shiraz. But I think it works best in intermediate climates. I'm not convinced it works well in very cool climate, but certainly for Coonawarra, I think it's a natural.
Alan, just out of interest, how old are the vines from the V&A lane?
The Cabernet ranged from the most recent plantings, 2002, but the great majority of the vines that are contributing to this wine are 1972. And the majority of those vineyards have been rejuvenated. So whilst they're 40 years old, they're presenting quite young style fruit in a way, bright fruit.
Do you have anything to add, Jeremy?
Yes, I just think if you look at the V&As as a pair, you see in the first case that beautiful translucent sweet fruit of the Shiraz, and then the Cabernet is just coming here, and you see the introduction of the Cabernet structure beneath this blend, and I just think that it's a lovely illustration of how these two varieties can work together. I love them both. I always look forward to these releases every year. Just it's something that suits my palate. I really enjoy them.
And you have a fairly extensive palate, Jeremy. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's now move on to really this is the very important wine, the 55th vintage. As I said, it's the Wynns Coonawarra Estate Black Label Cabernet Sauvignon 2010. Incredible heritage it has, and as we all know, one of the reputation is one of the most cellared wines in Australia. So I'm going to give you a moment to have a taste. I can find it. So, you've congratulations, by the way, 20th anniversary, which, as I said, quite an achievement. How would you describe the evolution of the Black Label over that period of time?
Yes, so our Black Label Cabernet is certainly our most important wine. It's the wine we're known for and judged by. And in recent years, we have focused a lot on the integration of the tannin and acid and of course the oak of this wine, which contributes to the texture. So you can see in this wine, albeit from a great vintage, that it's very supple and integrated. You could easily drink this wine now. Of course, with the heritage that Wynns Black Label Cabernet has, and we're approaching our 60th vintage in a couple of years, we expect the wine to age for considerable periods. However, there is no reason why you couldn't drink this wine straight away.
I totally agree with that. Alan, I have to say, 2010, it was a year without without heat waves and soggy skies. Would you sort of call it one out of the bag? Was it a pretty exceptional year for you?
It was exceptional in that the temperatures were very even right through. At flowering time we had, which flowering for us is late November, early December, and at flowering time, if it's warm, you get very even berry development, which then carries through for the whole season, which was the case in 2010. So we had quite good yield setting, but we needed to manipulate and do a fair bit of fruit thinning at veraison, at colour change, to put the vines in that ideal balance. But despite being a bit warmer than average, it was a humid year, more humid. There was a little bit of rain without disease risk, but that humidity, I think, has assisted the vine stay in a very nice place through the growing season.
Mm. And James, would you have any comments?
Yes, it's certainly a fair substrate of tannins there, and that in particular would encourage me to leave this one well alone, even more so than some of the other wines that I suggested will sell well. I think this actually does need some time to fully resolve itself. I have no fears whatsoever for the wine down the track. There is absolutely enough fruit there so that when the tannins do soften, the fruit will still be there, and you'll have a lovely glass.
You're making lots of noises. You obviously agree.
Yeah, I'm agreeing, and I just think it's a terrific wine. I love it. Years like 2010 remind me of years like 2004, and if you really go back into the 62s and 66s, and you just see this beautiful, effortless, natural balance. Obviously, as we've heard from Alan and Sue, there's a lot of work behind the scenes here, but the fruit is just charmingly balanced, and that's what this wine's all about, and it really comes with a 50-year guarantee. Given the fact that last night, we were lucky to try the 65 from a year that is not considered a signature vintage, and that was still in great shape.
It was sensational.
How long will this go?
Yeah, and where do you get 50-year guarantees? Nowhere.
And the screw cap.
And it's under
the screw cap.
That's
Oh, yes.
right. God bless it.
We could give you a whole masterclass just on the screw cap. Now, Sue did mention, of course, that she's got her 60-year tasting that's actually coming up. Now, she's a little bit low. She's a little bit low on some of the vintages in the 60s, actually anywhere between the 60s, isn't it? So there's a bit of a call to arms out there for some of you who are interested in discussing the contents of your cellars, because we've got it coming up. And so if you are holding out, and I know she's all about sort of making sure that you buy the wine, but she's actually interested in buying it back. Because I think it's quite significant. 60-year tasting is quite significant, and you need to sort of beef up your supplies a little bit.
Yes, certainly. So any of the wines between, say, 62 to 8, we're very interested in hearing from you.
Okay, 1962. 1962 to 1968. So there you go. So if that's you and you're holding out, you can just contact Sue at wynns.com, and that would be fantastic. And then I think we're all invited back to come back for the vertical tasting. What do you think? Okay, let's move on to the Wynns Coonawarra Estate, the Glengyle Cabernet Sauvignon 2009 single vineyard. It's actually been getting some really positive press of late. I was reading something in the Fin Review, and Tim White wrote something quite positive. He was snarling at me when I actually mentioned it. But look, it's out there, and I said it's getting a great reception. Alan, could maybe first of all just tell us a little bit about the Glengyle vineyard?
This is one of our favourite vineyards. It's located south of the winery here, about 4 kilometres south. It's just north of V&A Lane. It's a 20-hectare vineyard planted in 1969. We comprehensively rejuvenated about a quarter of the vineyard in 2002, and so that parcel of fruit was featured in our first single vineyard wine in 2007 from this vineyard. So, and it's pretty much the same parcel that's featured here in 2009. The vineyard has lovely deep terra rossa soil, and the vines are typically low yielding, and so that low yielding aspect means that they ripen very early. It's one of our earlier ripening vineyards, and be regarded as a fairly special site.
Right. Jeremy, you've actually tasted the 2007. Of course, we had the 2009 here. Do you think is there any sort of key characteristics that really give heart to this particular wine?
Yeah, I think it's, as Alan's saying, it's one of the earliest sites. And so when you look at the wines from the property, they tend to reflect slightly more dried herbal, perhaps slightly more minty expression of Cabernet, all of which is perfectly within the varietally correct spectrum of Cabernet character. I also find these wines quite savoury. And this one in particular, love the 09s because it's a terrific season for Wynns, and this wine has a real chalky fineness texture, which I just think with the fruit just gives a beautiful length on the palate. We're talking a lot about cellaring potential. This one has by the truckload.
Good to hear that. James, stylistically, I have to say, what's the importance for Wynns of having a single vineyard release?
It cannot be overemphasised. I was talking to Alan earlier, simply because of the size of the vineyards that Wynns have, the amount of work that's gone into these vineyards, the very cerebral, for want of a better word, approach that is taken to fruit selection and to then making the wines If you want to talk about single vineyard, and of course every man and his dog is on with single vineyards these days, if they possibly can do it, and very often that just tells you that the single vineyard doesn't do it, and it should have been multiple vineyards. But here, this isn't spin, this is reality, and I really love the balance of this wine. It is beautifully balanced and beautifully structured. Arguably, here today, one of the best balanced wines from my palate on the table. I'm not saying, that's just simply a statement in itself. So, single vineyard that really does work, it's not spin.
There you go, Sue. It's a pretty good wrap. Happy with that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now I'm going to move to our last wine of the bracket. It's the Wynns Coonawarra Estate John Riddoch Cabernet Sauvignon 2009. Obviously a flagship wine for the Wynns portfolio. The definitive John Riddoch Cabernet really is made in small quantities, as most of us know, from the best available fruit, and as we've discussed, it was an exceptional year. So, Jeremy, I'll ask you, what actually makes this particular wine such a standout for you?
I love this wine. I've been lucky to try it a few times now, and every time it's just blown me away for the fact that it unfolds slowly, as it has done today in the glass. I guess the temperature here is a bit on the chilly side, it's holding it back, but but it's just flourished, and it's deeply laid in its perfume and in its palate. And what I really love about the way John Riddoch has evolved, I think, since 1999, is towards, it's really what Sue and the whole team are all about. It's all about integration and balance and a seamless marriage of the components. And this wine just glides down. It's a big wine. And when you keep it open and look at it, you almost forget what a powerful wine it is, so artfully is it put together. And I think that's a huge strength. Just while I happen to be talking, I'd say that, just like to make a comment that this year for my forthcoming book, which will be the 2013 Wine Annual, I've added 2 wines to my list of 5-star wines, taking a total of 23 in Australia. Those wines are both from Wynns, and they are the John Riddoch and the Michael. So that's the way I see these things.
Very good. So you'll be rather pleased about that too.
Yes, that's new news. Yes.
I mean, the thing about the John Riddoch, it's not a pretentious label. It's really one that can be consumed young, or because we say we can put it down for some time. Your thoughts on how distinguished this particular wine is?
Well, I think it's well positioned at the end of the tasting. It'd be very difficult to, come onto another wine and not have it well and truly in the shadow of this wine. I mean, you use terms like distinguished, aristocratic, etc., and they may be weasel words, but I still think that they, in fact, do apply to this wine. It is a seriously wonderful Cabernet, and I would love to see this on a duel at dawn with the best that the Napa Valley can produce, and there would be one carcass on the ground, and that would be the Napa Valley Cabernet, and there would be one standing triumphant, which would be this wine.
Beautifully put. I love that. That's why we love you, James Halliday.
Napa Valley.
That's right.
America.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that actually brings our masterclass to an end. We certainly hope you've enjoyed the discussion and been fairly enlightened as to the new releases. Would you please put your hands together and thank our panel, Sue Hodder, Jeremy Oliver, Alan Jenkins and James Halliday. And importantly, thank you very much for joining us, and to all our online guests, it's been great to have your company. We know you're at the other end. And to all our wine enthusiasts around the world, thank you very much for your continued support, and have a gorgeous afternoon. Cheers.